Okay, Madam Chair, we are live and ready when you are.
All right, thank you. All right, bring this meeting to order. The public notice of the Sylvania City Council work session, Monday, November 8th, 2021 at 5:31. Our discussion for tonight is the presentation from Alaska Permanent Capital Management Company regarding the management of the Sylvania Permanent Fund. And we have Blake, we have Michaela. But I think before we go there, our city manager would perhaps like to do a little intro.
Thank you, Councilmember Rojas, and thank you everybody for making the time to come a little bit before our council meeting. While we're going to be hearing from the Alaska Permanent Capital Management Company this evening, this is also a great opportunity to just quickly review the Seldovia Permanent Fund as we have some new members on the council. And so in your packet, if you go to page 3 and 4, you'll see the Title 12 Seldovia Permanent Fund from our municipal code. And just to reiterate, the purpose for the permanent fund, as mentioned, is the establishment of the fund to preserve and trust assets of the city for the benefit of present and future generations of Seldovia residents. And if you go through the code itself, it gives instructions on how the permanent fund can be managed. The city of Seldovia for quite some time has been using the Alaska Municipal League Local Investment Pool, which is known as Amloc, to manage not just our permanent fund dollars, but also the major maintenance and repair fund dollars that council recently recognized and named within Amloc. And we've also been transferring grant funds also into that Amloc account. But the permanent fund has been in there for quite some time. And so if you go to page 51, or I'm sorry, page 47 and 48 in your packet, you'll see that over the past 5 years, the amount of interest that the total amount of dollars in that AMLEP account has generated $40,724 in interest. And because of the way that the Seldovia Permanent Fund is restricted in terms of its investment portfolios and how you're able to invest the fund, it's been very conservative in terms of bonds. And I'm hoping APCM can touch base on that this evening. Also at the very end of your packet, you'll see a bar chart as well as numbers, an Excel spreadsheet, columns just showing what I was able to pull from our audited financial statements as well as from our bank account information to try and understand exactly how the Seldovia Permanent Fund has been used in the past or how the total amount has fluctuated. And you'll notice that the audit statements differ from what the two bank accounts state we had in that account. And so I think that's important too for the new council members to just review that. I learned from our audited statements that our auditors have been using the Seldovia Permanent Fund dollars to offset the deficit that's in our general fund. And hopefully in the future when they come to speak to council about that deficit and how they've used the permanent fund to offset costs, that can be an opportunity for you to ask those questions. But that's why the audited statement said that for FY 2020, the permanent fund only had $153,306 in it, when the audited statements were also reflecting a total of $780,616. So I'm just touching on some information here in the packet. So if you have the bar graph and the charts just showing the dollar amounts, you can then take that information and go back to Seldovia Municipal Code to see how the permanent fund was supposed to be managed in the past. So that's the information that's in the packet. I'm really happy to and excited to introduce you to APCM. We do have Blake and Michaela on from the company. I first learned about APCM actually from our city attorney. He mentioned the name to me, and they actually already manage Seldovia's money through the Alaska Municipal League Local Investment Pool, but they're restricted by how the board separate of the city of Seldovia, sets the standards for how that money should be managed. So they already actually manage our money through Amloc. And then when we were having discussions about the low amount of interest that the Seldovia Permanent Fund has been generating, I reached out to APCM to touch base with them, not just based on the recommendation of our city attorney, but also by how extensively they're used by municipalities throughout the state of Alaska. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Blake and Michaela, and hopefully you two can give an introduction. We have everyone from the council except the mayor this evening.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And before I turn on our slide deck here, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Blake Phillips. I'm a director at Alaska Permanent Capital. I oversee our institutional business. Michaela Covio works very closely with me. And we have had several conversations with Rachel and staff, kind of learning about all the elements that you have within code already, and some preliminary goals of what the permanent fund, how the permanent fund has been set up, and looking through the code that you have existing. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and try to, let me see here. Michaela was already worried about this because I'm not the biggest pro on technology. Okay, I can. If the host could give me screen sharing ability. There we go. So to give you a quick overview, so Alaska Permanent Capital has been established over almost 30 years ago, and it was started by Dave Rose, who was the first executive director of the Alaska Permanent Fund. And after 10 years in that position, he realized, what a lack of access to professional Wall Street level investment expertise there was available to municipalities, nonprofits, private corporations across the state of Alaska. And he set forth to fix that problem. Since then, we've grown to be the largest investment advisor, focused on helping provide these solutions to communities across Alaska. We have over $3.8 billion under management and advisement across the state, and one of the largest teams with the most credentials in the state. And then if you go below that to, our entire platform is meant to ensure that we are a fiduciary for all of our clients. So that means very basically that we've designed our entire platform to ensure that we have no conflicts of interest, that we're gaining that we are aligned with our clients to ensure that they are successful. And if they're not successful, we are not. I can get into that a little bit further later, but there's no, outside source of fees other than our very straightforward fees that we charge our clients. We have no commissions. We don't get any, we don't push products in order to gain other sources of revenue. And that's really important and also different from a lot of what you will see across the industry. And so that is really the foundation of everything that we do. As Rachel mentioned, we work with over 31 municipalities across the state. We have over $2.5 billion that we manage for public entities. So that is really, the foundation upon which our firm was built. All of our decisions are made in the city's best interest. All of our accounts are separately managed. And, why that is important is when we take on a client in managing their funds, they are solely for the purpose of the city of Seldovia. There's no other considerations we have to make for different goals that other clients might have. Everything is designed specifically for those specific goals, because when you think about it, everyone has, different aims, risk tolerances, and a variety of things that make it very important that it is, your investment funds are solely driven by your goals, not anyone else's, not ours, specifically for you. And I also wanted to say that there is a lot of information in this. I'm going to move through some of it rather quickly, just in the because of the time we have. But if there are any questions anyone has, I am not upset if anybody wants to interrupt and ask questions as the rules of your council allow. So the key today really is that you understand how Alaska Permanent Capital goes about managing money, our philosophy and process, and again, the fiduciary duty that we hold very seriously in managing these funds. We're going to talk a little bit about the policies and code that you already have established, talk a little bit about where they need to be improved most likely, or what our recommendations would be. And then also provide a couple of investment portfolio models that we think would apply for your permanent fund. The three pillars of all of our portfolios, and there's a lot more complexity that goes into it, but these are I think the important elements. And so each portfolio that we design should be optimal. And that goes to when I was speaking to having a separate account so that it is optimally designed to meet, not just the return goals, but the risk tolerances, the time horizons, and everything that is specifically attributable to what Seldovia is trying to accomplish with these funds. And by having it be a separately managed account, it also it's important to realize that these policies are dynamic and should always be thinking about your investment portfolio. It's not something that, there's a term within the industry, it's set it and forget it, that, we're going to have, if we were to partner together, that we're going to be continually reviewing this and ensuring that everything, that there have not been changes in Seldovia, just as we will be bringing you any recommendations we would have as far as what the market is doing and whether or not the portfolio that we had set up initially is still accomplishing those goals. Asset allocation is the other important piece. And what I mean by that is, lots of times when you turn on CNBC or watch financial news or those things, you're talking about individual stocks and those types of things, or market timing, when to buy. But 90% of returns are based upon having a proper asset allocation. So we create portfolios primarily with exchange traded funds as those go to the next pillar, which is controlling expenses. So when the expenses that are inherent within an investment portfolio, you're going to have the fee that you pay to your investment advisor, whether that's us or someone else, and then also the investment products that you use to access the market. And that is one thing you can control, is those expenses. And right now with diversified investment portfolios for permanent funds, those are about 0.1 to 0.15% is where we've kind of gotten them down to based on the different products that we use. And those are fees that are outside of us. And again, the products that we use, we get no benefit from whatever those are. We use an open platform. We have no branded products so that we can make unbiased decisions to make sure we're trying to make the best investment decisions we can for our clients. This is the main how our process works. And the planning phase, which is what we are in the middle of right now, is basically, and we've already been engaged, with Rachel and other staff in trying to fully understand where Seldovia's code is at right now, what the goals of that are. And we take all of those tools or all of that information and utilize it, ask questions. And once we have that, we analyze all of that information and try to provide what we think are going to be the best portfolio strategies in order to accomplish those goals. We take that, implement them through investing in the market, and then every year we come back and review, make sure that we understand your goals haven't changed, the risk tolerances haven't changed, there have been no outside external events that might need us to make some big changes to it. And so it's a perpetual process. We're constantly making sure that your investment strategy is always changing to reflect those things. This is one of the slides I'm going to move through rather quickly because, but these are the kinds of exercises that we run through when we're doing this modeling, is seeing what could happen as we go through different events and how that might affect the different portfolios. And then also later, we're going to get into some modeling, but something that we look at very closely is also, how these things move over time. So these are all different paths that can happen over the course of an investment, horizon. And it's important to understand those things. And probably very fresh in everyone's mind is what happened last year during the COVID crisis. The market was down about 30% over the course of 1 month, and understanding that can happen and how the portfolio that you have can affect that, and that we stay the course through those unfortunate events is extremely important. And so that's something that, as we work through what kind of strategies we want to look at, that those are realizations that we will have downturns and that we do not want to be changing during those times. And so we'll spend a lot of time talking about the risk that is inherent within those portfolios. So this is going through again, and some of this is repeated, but we do that to try to really instill these different items. So within goals, there's inflation protection, which is about 2% right now. So that's something that we always want to make sure. So as Rachel mentioned earlier, a lot of your funds have been in Amloc, and with short-term investment rates where they are right now, around 0, you're effectively losing purchasing power. And that's why in these long-term permanent fund type accounts, you really want to be thinking about inflation as one of those items. The time horizon, which is in a permanent fund, perpetual. If not, there's different what we call bucketing strategies we can use. If there, that was a goal. Today, we're going to be just focused on talking about the permanent fund. Potential distributions that may be wanted to help support the budget of Seldovia. And then growth targets of, where you would potentially like to see those distributions. So oftentimes when we're starting with new permanent funds, we don't necessarily recommend distributions so that we can potentially hit those larger sustainable distributions later in the future. There's some information, some other permanent funds that we run across the state, the city of Fairbanks, the city of Kenai, and those can kind of provide some examples to show how we have helped design those policies for those municipalities. The other items that are extremely important are risk tolerance, any kind of liquidity that you might need, tax considerations, and asset class preferences. Some areas of the state, as you can imagine, are more affected by certain things, up on the North Slope. They have quite a bit of exposure within their communities to how the oil prices work, and others not so much. But so we may remove commodities in certain examples for that. And then just to make sure the expectations are clear of what that return target is and what that means from the kind of risk that we'll have to take on. And then very quickly, including within our services, we give monthly reporting, which is based upon global investment performance standards, which is the highest level really that people use. So it goes through every month. You have several levels of audited performance that is provided to you, in addition to the other statements that you'll get your permanent custodian. And that's another checks and balance that we provide for our clients as your fiduciary, so that you get a performance numbers from us, but you also get it from the custodian. So you have a checks and balance there. So you don't have to just completely rely on what we're telling you your investments are doing, but you also have another independent party who is giving you that same kind of information so that you can make sure that everything is lining up. Maybe before I get into kind of the planning phase, is there any questions on that information? I know kind of ran through a lot of numbers I talk about every day, but it can be a little more arcane than normal and normal things that we're talking about.
Is there
Vivian, I
anyone,
have one.
Heidi? Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, George.
Yes, sir. When you talked about individual accounts for each entity investing with you, if you found another city that was in a particular investment that was going quite well, and it seemed to fit our needs, would you pitch that same thing to us, or would we ever hear about it?
Yeah, very good question. And so some of the options that just in preliminary talks with Rachel that I'm going to present to you later, they are similar type strategies, given that they're not just because we're looking to utilize the same strategies across all of these portfolios that we manage, but they have similar veins of, goals, risk tolerances, and what can be used. But another element of this is that we are able to provide our clients the breadth of things that we see and how different cities and municipalities are managing their money, and provide those different kind of views to you to have the ability to kind of make sure you're understanding what other cities are doing with their funds.
Thank you.
Is there any other council member has a question for Blake at this time? Okay, Blake, I'm sorry, Heidi, I can't tell if there's anybody else who has a comment or question. City Council.
Okay.
I am not seeing anybody else at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, Blake, if you want to continue, that'd be great.
Yep. And so in our conversations, with Rachel and looking at the code that is in place for your permanent fund, what we do in this, you'll see in the right there. So we have the investment policy, which we will help create, there is already code within, I believe, Title 12 in your policy or in ordinances. And what we always want to do is take a look at how we create that investment policy, understand if there's going to be the ability to have additional contributions so that we can build that in when we're considering what kind of investment path the fund will take. And then also what the spending policy goals are. For example, the City of Fairbanks, and this is public information, so that's why I'm able to share it with you. And in the appendix of this rather long deck that we put together for you, there are some of those policies. But for example, they target a 4% distribution, which I believe is the same as your policy. And so when we go to look at what we're trying to do with the investment policy, that's kind of one of the main goals we're trying to hit. Make sure that spending policy is in line with how that investment policy works. And it's really making sure that all of these things line up and are kind of in simpatico, so that, we can't, if we just left, if you left your funds just purely in a lower return type investment strategy like Amloc, which is only getting to 0%, you're never going to be able to realistically hit that 4% policy, inflation protect those funds, and have anything left over at the end of the day. And so we really want to make sure that all of those things are aligned. So to kind of recap it, permanent funds are meant to be very long-term perpetual type accounts that can supplement the city's revenues. City of Fairbanks has been doing it for a long time, obviously a larger municipality, but they're able to pull over $4 million a year now to supplement their budget. And those are the kinds of goals I think that, when you're thinking about this for the long term, it's hard because, we see it across the state, we run into a lot of adversity, that probably people in the lower 48 don't see. We deal with a lot of different types of events. And so in balancing those decisions of, making that capital investment on something right now, because that money is there, or if we want to have this money for the long term and down the road, that is really able to provide a very large benefit in a sustainable, perpetual path. That's why you create these permanent funds. And also it can help, when you have that potential extra, we have tax revenues that fluctuate based off tourism, everything. I've been to Seldovia. It's a lovely place. I live in Girdwood. We all deal with, I had my road washed away just last week because we got 17 inches of rain over the course of about 36 hours. Pretty much exhausted our emergency funds that we had. And these are the types of things that you can have that extra bucket when you do run into these unforeseen events. So this is, if you look at the lower left, there are factors. These are kind of what I would call the main 5 things that we really try to dial into when we have those planning meetings. So time horizon with the permanent fund, we'd like it to be perpetual. The risk tolerance, which you've heard me kind of harp on a little bit earlier already, is something that I really encourage everyone to focus on. Is how much risk do you need to take? That's very much tied to the next one, which your expected return is to meet that, whatever that distribution goal is. But how much risk can you tolerate? When there is those big downdrafts in the market, we don't want to be changing our investment policy at those times, and times when there is panic and when there is mispricing in the markets. We don't want to be selling out of our riskier assets in order to make sure that, that is not the time to circle the wagon. So it's really important to think about those numbers. And especially when we've had, markets that have just kind of been going from the lower left to the upper right for a long time, it sometimes is harder to remember that markets also go down. And so being able to stay the course with the appropriate level of risk is extremely important. Asset classes, we're using up to 15 now for the permanent fund type portfolios. Those are things that we'll go through, but they all add diversification factors that lower that risk, but can be also tailored if there are certain elements that we don't want to have. And for an example, also we manage money for several Alaska Native corporations who have very large real estate holdings. And so we, looking at it holistically, sometimes remove those. It's really just dependent, but it's also, again, a decision that the city of Seldovia can make for themselves because the account is designed specifically for your goals. And so those are all things that can be tailored within the portfolio and the investment strategy specifically for you. And then with the tax status, it's relatively easy because it's tax exempt. So that answers our question for us. These are some of the observations that we have based off of your current policy. And I know Rachel and her staff and the council have been kind of looking at this to clean it up. There are several, in order to move forward with, I think, this type of permanent fund type investment strategy, there's going to have to be some changes that into allowable investments, and probably some added risk control language that we'd like to put in there if you were to move forward with partnering with us. And really, all of our goals are designed to create some very strong protections for the city. And even though we haven't partnered together yet, if we were to not become your partner down the road, we want you to have these strong controls in place and these risk parameters that ensure that if somebody else were to come in and be managing the portfolio, they're not allowed to, go outside their lane and, get you into something that's going to derail the entire investment strategy. Before I jump into just what we would be showing you as we went through the planning phase on model portfolios, is there any other questions I can answer about the work we've done at this stage?
Council, is there any questions for Blake right now? Madam Clerk, you don't see any questions?
I'm not seeing any at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you. Go ahead, Blake.
Okay. Based on our preliminary conversations and what we have done with other permanent funds around the state, these are three portfolio type options that we would be probably recommending based on the information that we have at this time. And so what you see here, other than a lot of numbers and colors, is these are all the different asset classes that we would utilize in a permanent fund. And so you can see this is large cap US stocks, mid cap US stocks, small cap, international, emerging markets, and then what we call alternatives, REITs, which is real estate investment trust. That's how we access the real estate market. Infrastructure, which is things like cell towers, and actually not as familiar in the US, but overseas, like I think all three airports in London are actually publicly traded securities. The Tokyo Railway, that's infrastructure that adds certain inflation type protected, but also very steady. When we don't turn off our cell phones when we hit a hard economic time. So commodities, which I mentioned before, alternative beta is a little more complex one, but it's a volatility type dampening tool. And as we kind of hit to where the Fed is likely to start raising interest rates, can add certain characteristics to the portfolio. And then all the various different fixed income products that we use. And the idea is that all of these portfolios have thousands of securities in them, creating a broadly diversified portfolio, which reduces individual risk to any certain type of event, whether it's, nobody's flying on airlines because we have COVID, or oil prices go way down. By having those so many different securities within it, you can gain a lot of the benefit of those returns without having that unique risk of any individual asset class. And these are three different models that we're using right now that we adjust every single year. And based upon risk tolerance and return expectation, we would basically recommend you in a certain direction of one of those three, most likely for the permanent fund. Here's the very fun finance, more nerd math stuff that is important to also look at though. And so when we do these models, we use something called Monte Carlo simulations, which gives 5,000 different scenario paths over the next 10 years. And what this provides us with is, well, we have our expected returns on these different models of 5.8, 6.6, and 7%. That's what we expect those annual returns to be on each of those investment portfolio options. But it also gives us what the expected ranges could be in any given year. And what you'll hear me always talk about is these numbers, these downside numbers. Any given year, those portfolios can be down that much. We never worry about this number because that's the fun number. It's very high and we never really have any problems dealing with those high returns. But we want to really really want to be thinking about how much downturn are we comfortable with, And that ties into a lot of things as well, depending on how we want to use it as far as distributions go. Because the last thing we want to see also is when it comes time for you to draw upon these funds for the city's needs, that we just happen to be in a downturn. And we want to make sure that whatever that downturn is and whatever that particular portfolio is not going to do anything to inhibit the ability of the city to utilize those funds or help sustain the budget. And so these are the kinds of exercises that we will walk through every year and just reiterate that we're comfortable with what those levels look like and how much volatility is inherent in those portfolios. Finally, so we did kind of an initial scenario analysis for you. I think the fund balance is actually about 540,000, but we ran it off 500,000. And so that same information that we had in this slide before here also spits out these kind of outcomes. And this shows what the different portfolios can look like. And so the black line there is the 50% confidence level. These are the numbers we encourage municipalities to use for planning purposes for the long term. Is over, at the end of 10 years in the more conservative portfolio, we would expect it to be at 854,000. And this has no contributions or withdrawals. Those are all numbers. Those are all things that we can build into the modeling. For this purpose, we did not. And then the blue box that you see here is 50% of those 5,000 outcomes. And so really that gives you the area that you can have the highest probability for planning purposes when you're looking forward to say, what are we likely to have at the end of this time frame? And then to go on the extremes, you have the kind of the tail numbers. So 97.5% of the portfolio outcomes were above 565,000. So above where we started at. But those are, as you move out of that blue box, it's less and less likely that we're in that range or on the other side, this range. But that does encompass 95% of those 5,000 outcomes. So as you can see, you can get an idea of how much adding that, extra risk, how much extra return you can get. And then just also like on the upside and downside, how much more widely it can vary. And as you can see, as you move to the right, the tails in the spread of outcomes becomes larger because there's more volatility inherent in the portfolio.
Blake, could I pause you there?
Yes, absolutely.
So we provided council with how much interest the city has made over the last 5 years with having its money invested through Amloc. So in 5 years, we've made a little over 40,000. So I just wanted to make sure that council saw that even in the most conservative option, which I believe that's what Model 4 represents, is conservative. Model 5 is moderate. Model 6 is risk, meaning the city's willing to take more risk in investing its money for a greater outcome in terms of interest. But if you were to look at the most conservative model, Model 4, you're saying that in 10 years, 500,000 could possibly grow to 854,000. So that's an increase in $354,000 when our current investment strategy has made 40,000 or about 41,000 in 5 years.
That's correct. And so to add to that, it's important to know. So if I showed you a simulation of keeping the money in Amloc without, because we're adding in not just more stocks, but bonds and a variety of other things, that Amloc number would probably look like 500,000 with a range around it of probably give or take 20,000 and encompass the entire thing. So the Amloc is a very good tool for certain things, but for permanent funds, it is not always for long-term growth And when you think about long-term time horizons, what that does is enable you to take more risk, because as long as you're comfortable with the risk level that you're taking, you're going to be paid for that over the long-term horizon. And that's where AMLIP is not necessarily meant for this type of purpose. And that's where, so you get those higher returns over time with taking on that added risk. But there's no scenario where you get a particularly large amount of long-term return. And with where interest rates are right now, at best, you're really kind of going to potentially keep pace with inflation.
Great. So AMLIP is for liquid cash, short-term investments. Like we received grant funds, we put them in AMLIP, and we know we're going to use them over the next fiscal year. Permanent fund, as the code says, it's for current and future generations of Soldovians. And so we're looking to make sure that we're growing the principal by taking more risk to generate more interest. I was hoping you could touch base on why AMLIP has been doing so poorly. So why have we been seeing more conservative bond investments doing so poorly?
So the Alaska Municipal League investment pool is what's more known as a money market type investment. And what that means is it's in extremely safe securities, entailing largely treasuries, commercial paper, which is very short-term debt that, companies like Apple and Alaska Airlines, and then they all issue this stuff, and it's usually under 1 year maturity, and accordingly is required to pay a much lower level of risk, because it's easier for the financial markets to analyze how much risk a company or government is going to have in a very short amount of time frame. And so when you're doing that, they just are not forced to pay that. And when we go through, so in the past 10 years, we have gone through two different periods where interest rates have basically, like the Federal Reserve and other central banks across the world have, when we go through crisis, what they do is they drop interest rates to zero. And so probably the biggest determining factor of what the returns on AMLIP are going to look like is what rates the central banks are going to provide. So when we hit COVID, we went from, I think, between 1.5% to 2% is where we were earning on AMLIP at that time in those safer investments. And then they dropped it to zero. And so that's where, and we expect it to be probably moving up to between 0.5% and 1% in the next 12 to 18 months is probably the expected return range that we can get from AMLIP. We have a much tighter range, as I mentioned, on what you were going to be able to earn. So you don't have that uncertainty about it, but you also have some pretty good certainty that you shouldn't expect to earn any kind of meaningful rate of return going forward, or for the near to intermediate term.
Right. So I guess doing poorly isn't the right way to phrase it, because AMLIP is designed for like extremely safe pools of money. So it's not doing poorly. I've just gotten questions from council. Why is AMLIP only making $6 a month in interest? And so that is a great answer for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And it's extremely safe. We've never had an instance where pool participants have not been able to pull out every dollar at par at $1 that they've put in. So you do have that extreme safety, but for that safety, you give up the possibility of much return.
Perfect. Thank you.
Blake, are you there?
Yep.
Okay.
I was just making sure there was no more. So these are this is just an overview of just giving our fee schedule again. We have in the top left there, these are these are the fees, the only fees that we charge. There's no, back before this fun time called COVID, I very much like to come out annually and give an in-person discussion, and I think it's much more productive in person to have these conversations so that we can all kind of see how people are reacting. But any kind of special requests for reports or, potentially looking at, so this is the permanent fund we're talking about, but talking about, potentially setting up some kind of capital improvement fund or things like that, or any particular requests about, what does it look like with if we were going to change the portfolio this way? All of our risk management, allocations, meetings, travel, there's no other fees. That's all encompassed within it. And then additionally in the lower left, which I think is even more important, is we have no conflicts of interest. There's no soft dollar purchases, and that is a term that basically says if we do enough business with one investment provider, they will kick back and pay for some of our computers or things like that. So it's a way of us gaining revenue from another angle without even our clients knowing. We don't do that. Very common in the industry. We have no revenue sharing agreements. We have no commission recapture programs, which would be if we traded with a certain bank enough that they would kind of kick back a certain amount of that to us. We don't do any of that. And we have no branded products where, if you look at something like a Vanguard, they tend to have very low fees, but guess what? They invest in all of their Vanguard products. And so we try to just really keep it open platform so that we can make unbiased decisions for the best of our clients. And so with that, I think that there's a bunch more stuff down here in the appendix that I was mentioning that talks about fiduciary considerations as you go through this process as fiduciaries for the city on the council. You're fiduciaries, but we act as fiduciary. We do take on that mantle of being a fiduciary for you as well. Here's some best practices these are all things that we take into consideration when we are managing funds. Some CFA components of an IPS. These are some of the products we use. And then also we included just some language from some of the other, cities that we manage money for. If you wanted to take a look at that as you're, going through the decisions that you're making and evaluating what you want to do.
Blake, if I may ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So roughly just clarifying on that, if the 1% fee that's all it is, that would be about $5,000 annually if it were a $500,000 investment, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Wonderful presentation. Are you done? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, that was the end of my prepared remarks. I kind of threw a lot at you, so I'm more than happy to clarify anything that anyone would like me to. And as you consider this, Rachel knows where to find me. So if there's something else that comes up that you need clarification on, or you'd like me to provide any more backup information for you as you consider the path you want to take, I'm more than happy to make myself available.
Yeah, we'll go to council and see if anybody has any questions, but I'd like to thank you for a tremendous presentation you put together. I look forward to our discussion as council members to discuss it. Council members, do any of you have a question at this time for Blake?
No, I just have a comment.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I have no idea what you were talking about, but great presentation. Thank you for that. I'm sure I'll get some more insight when we talk about it amongst ourselves. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and it doesn't hurt my feelings. I know that it's kind of drinking from a fire hose when you get into this stuff and try to get through it in the amount of time that we have. But like I said, I'm more than happy to help clarify anything I can for you.
Well, this is just way over my head,
Excellent.
but I'm trying to learn. So thanks again.
Very welcome. And I really
Thank you, Bobby.
for
Anyone
your-
else on council? Oh. Anyone else with council have a question or comment before we go to the public?
Councilmember Rojas, I have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Yep. No, go ahead.
So Blake, I was hoping you could touch on what would happen if the city elected to go with APCM and doing a more aggressive investment of the permanent fund and realized that the city needed to make a withdrawal prior to the time frame we were initially thinking.
So two things is, so first steps would be really kind of dialing in some of the things we talked about as far as what that risk tolerance level is. We'd very much want to dig into what size of withdrawal you might be thinking about taking out, because that could potentially change the recommendations we would made. Like I said, like one of the most important elements of picking different investment portfolio options is to really understand, what kind of distributions could potentially be drawn upon, because that will very much affect what we recommend, because we can't, as a fiduciary for you, recommend a too high level of risk that could potentially put at risk the need, being able to meet that need for that distribution. And so we would take that into account and bring forth new recommendations. Another element of moving forward would be giving you all the proper language recommendations that would need to go into allowable investments under the permanent fund. And also we would bring forth other elements that just further strengthen kind of the risk parameters that you have within your language.
Right, so what you're saying is, let's say the city wanted to go with a really aggressive investment strategy and we needed to pull $50,000 during the third year. Well, like you showed that range of risk, if we were assuming a 10-year period, perhaps that third year we saw a dip. And so if we were needing to pull funds at a time when the money has dipped because the risk with the fund is very high, that might hurt the city, because if we would have been able to wait for the 10 years and ride out the storm, so to speak, we would then have that higher amount of principal we were anticipating and not compromising it by making an earlier withdrawal.
Correct. And so we would be taking into account, the fact of the inflation protection of 2%. So just, off the top of my head, going off of Model 5 or Model 6, we're looking at about an absolute average annual return of 6%, but we're going to chop off 2% because we want to keep it inflation protected. And so that puts us down to about $20,000 is sustainable off of 500,000. And so then we're talking about making a distribution that's 2.5 times that size, and makes us really want to go back and make sure we drill into understanding that risk level. If that is the will of the council and what everyone wants to do, we're always going to make it abundantly clear that that's a risk that we want to make sure everybody understands.
Right, and I just bring that up because I think the city, in recognizing our current financial standing, is looking for additional ways to add security to the city of Sedovia's future. And that's actually the intent of the permanent fund, is to support the current and future generations of Soldovians, but we have a lot of aging critical infrastructure. So the council just elected to officially establish a major maintenance and repair fund. And we have a decent amount of money in that account, a little over 200,000. But if there was a catastrophic failure, like a tsunami actually hit the city or something like that, that's why I just bring it up, so that there's an awareness that if we go with a more aggressive strategy, it could hurt the city if we make an earlier withdrawal on that. So then on the flip side, to talk a little bit more positively, you brought up the city of Fairbanks and how they've established their permanent fund in such a way that they can take 4% off of it every year. Could the city of Seldovia position itself so that after a certain amount of time, we can start taking money from that investment and using it to balance our budget?
Yeah, absolutely. And that'd be part of the planning process too, is because, I think one of the really helpful tools that we can provide is the council can come up with where do we want to be? Like, it's going to be, given we're starting with 500,000, but saying like, hey, we want to get to the spot where we can sustainably withdraw $100,000 annually. Well, we can show you what you need to do that, and what the contribution paths would look like, or how long you would have to delay distributions, and help you provide those tools to see, the reality of, those kinds of wants. But I think it can be very helpful from your side to just, see what that reality looks like.
Great. And then one last thing, just because as the city of Seldovia, we have procurement policies that say that if we want to enter into a contractual service with someone, it could be best to do a competitive process. So like a request for proposals in order to see what services are out there for managing the permanent fund. And I had asked you this question about competitive procurement, because the city also has the option to do sole source, where we would elect not to go competitive and go with APCM if it was determined that that would be in the city's best interest. And I'd just like you to share the insight you provided me about the benefits of not doing an RFP.
Well, don't fully put that in my mouth, but so we do go both directions. We compete via RFP, but we also go via just sole source. I think one of the things I think I shared with you is that when you enter, I think the procurement process is tricky, right? Because it tries to put the same rules around all sorts of different things, from building bridges to providing, servicing of parking meters to investment consulting. Our contracts are, whether or not your RFP procurement is for 5 years, our contract is terminatable upon 30 days. And so when you think about, I think, procuring investment advisors, locking somebody into a 5-year contract and then 2 years in, seeing if they're not doing a good job for you, really doesn't work in your favor. But I think a lot of it is more working towards sole sourcing based upon how the business works. And so I guess that would be, I can't tell you to not RFP or go sole source. But I'm telling you up front that, if you were to hire us, you can fire us with 30 days notice, if you didn't feel like we were working in the best interests of the city. And so as you think about that, that would be just what I would pass along.
Yes, and sorry to put you on the spot there. It's just as I work with the council on the next steps, because time is of the essence, and we've already went a long amount of time with keeping the permanent fund in Amloc. And so if there is the interest to make up for that time and move more quickly, I just wanted council to hear, like, sole source versus RFP, and current city staff have such limited capacity to draft and limited expertise to draft an RFP. But after we're done meeting with you and Nicola, I'll be asking the council for input on how they want to proceed with reinvesting or moving the permanent fund out of Amloc into something more aggressive. So I'm sorry if I put you on the spot there. That was
no, it's totally fine. It's just a little bit tricky.
Yes.
And so, if I guess on the sole source route, I guess why I point out is our contracts are terminatable within 30 days. And if you felt that for some reason you changed your mind and you wanted to go through a full kind of procurement process, that's not taken off the table for you. Whereas I think it does take it off the table for you sometimes with the RFP process and the investment management. And so it's something that I've had conversations with, some of our clients have very large amount of money and they have been moving more away from it. But, like I said, I do not want to be pushing you in either direction. We would love to be partnered with you guys. Those are just my objective comments for you.
Yes, got it. And then if council doesn't have any other questions, I just had one last one, which was you touched on losing purchasing power due to inflation and because we've been keeping money at Amloc. So I was hoping you could just explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, so right now, a lot of the inflation numbers you're seeing come out in the news is due to a lot of the supply chain issues that have been happening out of COVID. I don't know if anybody's seen the maps of the amount of ships that are kind of stuck off the port of Long Beach and LA. I mean, it's pretty wild. Never have we encountered something like that, but that has caused things like lumbers and used car prices and those things to be extremely highly elevated. I think for like example, Social Security cost of living adjustment this year is going to be pushing 6%. That's not where we expect it to be, but when you have inflation at 2%, and if you earn less than 2%, you are effectively losing purchasing power or the value of that money. So by not keeping pace with inflation, you're effectively, losing money. And so that's why when we do permanent funds, that's almost always something that we build in, and why I kind of just tell you that I'm chopping 2% off of it for inflation, and that our sustainable distribution rate needs to be taken into account inflation, and that should be the sustainable distribution rate that you can have once you decide to take distributions. So that 4% or whatever that number that is decided upon is the same as that 4% in 10 years as it is today. So you want to make sure that you're acknowledging that, even though it's not, it's not like you're spending that 2%, but the money is becoming less valuable.
Got it. Thank you.
Well,
if there's no other questions from the council, Madam Clerk, is there anybody in the audience that has a question?
I am not seeing any hands raised at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. Well, at this time, I'd like to thank Blake and Michaela for joining us, and I think we'll be looking forward to having a discussion later in the future. Rachel, do you have any other comments at this time?
I'd more so just like to hear from council, what council's initial thoughts are, because we are working towards getting the city in a better financial standing, and time is of the essence. And so if I don't know if council did want to move forward with an RFP or sole source, or what other information you would need in order to make a decision. So kind of looking for council's initial feedback after this or from this presentation, and anything that stood out to you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone in council that would like to comment to our city manager for a direction?
Comment.
Is that Bobby?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Bobby.
Okay. So do you need a decision right now? I'm kind of having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So I'm not quite sure what all you said. Do you need a decision now?
No decision now, just feedback to guide me and how to move forward. So what other information would council need in order to make a decision on if you would like to move the permanent fund out of Amloc, and if so, how would you like that to be done? And right now we have APCM, which is one investment firm, but there are other investment firms out there. So would council be interested in an RFP or doing a sole source contract with APCM? So just getting your initial responses or feedback from this presentation and what information you found helpful and what you might need more information on.
Well, personally, I'd like to talk about it some more at a future, either before the next meeting, or I don't know, I don't know how you want to do that, or when do we have to make a decision? Are we on a time frame?
No, you can, there's no pressure. It's just the longer that the funds stay in AMLIP, the longer we're in the current situation that we're in.
Right, I understand that. So I would just like to have another conversation
Okay.
whenever.
Right,
That's
so
what I'd like
if
to
I
do.
may. Yes, thank you, Bobby. I would agree. I think maybe if we had a conversation, a short work session, perhaps. And so everybody can throw in, get a few questions answered, and then give direction. I think we're all in favor of moving forward, getting our money out of where it's at right now and get it working for us. I think that's without a doubt what the council wants to go in that direction. And the presentation this evening was fantastic. Is there anyone else? George, I can't see hands waving or anybody who's on online. Jennifer? Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, George. Jennifer's up.
Yeah, so if we moved the money, are we talking moving all of it and investing all of that 500 and whatever 40 it is, or are we just gonna start over with the 500 and that 40 we do something else with? Does it matter? That's up to us to figure that out.
Correct, council member. So it gets up to the council on how much of the permanent fund you would like invested. So technically, the permanent fund is $570,144, but because council used 30 grand for the Herbert kiosk project, the account balance right now is $540,144. So council could elect to take the entire permanent fund and move it into a different investment strategy, or you can decide we want to take X amount and move it and then keep the other amount in AMLIP or something else.
Okay, because I mean, obviously we're in, tight times right now that it might not be in the best interest to invest it all in something that we can't touch, but maybe not, I don't know.
Thank you, Jennifer. George, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to go down along the same lines there. Rachel, I think you should, I think you brought us an excellent vehicle here. We probably won't be able to do any better, but we need to, I would suggest that you try to anticipate what sort of an emergency cushion we might need, peel that off of the account we have right now and go and invest the majority of it with this operation here.
Right, and Councilmember Nathan, I've thought about that, and that's initially why I was speaking to the city attorney many months ago about the permanent fund before I knew that we had a major maintenance and repair account. Unfortunately, the permanent fund, council can elect to do whatever it wants through an ordinance, but technically the permanent fund has very specific purposes: land acquisition, grants, and capital projects. And you can only use the principal, I believe, for land acquisitions, and then the interest, which becomes principal, or it's supposed to become principal at the end of the year. The interest you can use for capital projects and grants. So nowhere in the permanent fund code can the city use it for emergency purposes at this time. So if the council wants to, council can develop new code regarding emergency procurement, and that's actually a recommendation in one of the pieces of legislation we're discussing tonight. But the intent of the permanent fund wasn't specific to emergencies when the council that passed that ordinance brought it into being.
Obviously, that's the path we're going to have to take. It would be ridiculous to have some disaster befall us and have a bunch of money in the bank that we can't use to save ourselves. So we probably need to pass some legislation here to free up some part of it in any case and get the rest of it invested.
Thank you, George. You're done. Anyone else on council?
It's John. I got
Yeah,
a
go ahead,
couple of-
John.
I've been invested in a CalPERS. Are you familiar with that? This firm that's here tonight? CalPERS, Public Employees Retirement System.
The California Public and
Yeah.
Retirement System.
Yeah, your stuff is pretty much like that. And I guess the questions I have really is, with the monies that we have and the current rate of return that we're receiving, what would, if we were to take a moderate or an aggressive approach to investing with you folks, how much money in, let's say, 10 or 15 years could we expect to have? And, how much would we have to add to the fund maybe to be able to see a rate of a return of 500K a year, and then, for the fund, and then maybe we'll be able to withdraw 250K a year as a permanent income? How many years would we have to see that be invested to see that kind of goal?
So I'm not sure if you guys have your packets in front of you, but of slide 19 on the deck was just that 500,000 in those varying models, and that included no contributions or withdrawals. But that is one of the kind of resources that my firm can provide, is kind of reverse engineering into, as you come up with goals you'd like to see happen, we can tell you realistically what it looks like, of what kind of contributions you'd have to make right off the bat or over the years, and how long you would have to delay distributions in order to attain that.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think we need to come up with some goals, some long-term goals, to be able to put the city in the position to have some annual income as well as some growth each year. And what maybe the city could do with some unused assets that they have right now that they're not earning any income on, that maybe is actually costing them some money. Maybe we could liquidate a few assets to make it happen quicker.
And one of the things that, when we do have kind of greenfields type permanent funds, really thinking about, once you get that kind of, call it, infrastructure in place for how the fund is supposed to be, and it gets a little more defined that that's not just going to be a source of funds when we're just trying to figure out where we need that, 20,000, 50,000 to get a new truck or something like that. But
Right.
Get it very firmly into everyone's head that this is what we want to do with this money. We're not going to draw upon it. We're going to contribute to it when we can, in the hopes of really building something that's going to be a real, help the foundation of the city in a long term, in a long time. And we just can't touch it for a while. We need to think about growing it. And we are more than happy to, the modeling that I provided today was very basic. It just, no contributions, no withdrawals is 500,000. This is what it looks like in these various portfolios. But we can help work on that kind of planning as you kind of determine like where you'd like to be at.
Great. Thank you, Blake. And I think that's where
Thank
we're
you.
at, Rachel. I would say that we're probably at the point where we do need to meet as a group and discuss just these items we're talking about. But we're at 6:40 or 5:45 Alaska time, and we've got a council meeting. So unless there's any other questions, I think we should maybe take our recess before, unless Rachel, you have something more to say, or anybody has something pertinent. But yeah, okay. So it looks like we are we have time that the council needs to meet and discuss and book this. And again, I thank you so much for coming with this great presentation. And it's what the city is looking forward to investing. We need to do something. We know that. It's just determining, get our questions answered and sit down as a group and decide which direction we're going. But I thank you again so much for coming. and being part of our evening tonight.
Thank you for the time. And as you go through your deliberations, if something comes up where we can help, just let me know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you all.
Heidi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to go ahead and sign out of this meeting so that we can sign back into the next meeting, and we'll see everybody on the next meeting, hopefully. So thank you all, and we're going to close this one out.
Okay, thank you. Heidi, our mayor is going to be with us.
Yes, he should be.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. See you in a little bit.
Thank you. See you in a minute.
Okay.